All right. First of all, thank you, Michael Lynch, for giving me the opportunity to greet everyone this afternoon. It is now 12:01, and I'll make my comments brief. I'm Keith Alford, Dean and Professor here at UB School of Social Work, and it is a pleasure to welcome everyone to this wonderful series. And I'm really feeling excited because today we have one of our star alums, and that is, of course, Megan Battista, who actually served as the GSA president when she was an MSW student. And now she is making great strides in the profession, local community, and I would say even broader than that, nationally, with respect to all that she is doing. And so we're so very proud of her. Look forward to today's presentation. And I sometimes joke with Megan because I call her President Battista since she was GSA president, and I still want to do that. So welcome, President.
Thank you, Dean Alford, and thank you, Megan. So I am Michael Lynch. I'm a clinical faculty of the school, and I've been helping to convene the speaker series for, I think, at least 3 years now. I was trying to figure out how long it's been, but it's been at least three. And really the purpose of the speaker series is first to highlight the awesome work of our alums, and you'll get to hear more from Megan in a second. Also to expose students and practitioners to new career pathways. Many people have an interest in macro social work, but they don't really know how to go about doing that as a career or how to get your foot in the door. And then also just to highlight macro social work in general. It can be a smaller portion of the social work sort of workforce, but it's really important, and we're doing lots of really great work. So I'm going to introduce Megan. She's then going to have about 40 minutes to talk through her work and her career, and then we will turn it over to questions. Born and raised in Buffalo, Megan Battista has spent her career working towards equity for vulnerable communities in Western New York. She started her career as an elementary school teacher and an instructional coach at a Title I school in Buffalo. 5 years serving as a foster parent and foster parent mentor inspired her to transition into a role in child welfare, where she recruited, supported placements in adoptive homes for young people at risk of aging out of the system. Megan earned a MSW from the University of Buffalo in 2024. She was president of the GSA and did an awesome speech at graduation. And she completed her practicum experiences at Say Yes Buffalo and the Partnership for Public Good. In her current role, she's the Learning and Advocacy Coordinator at Liftoff Western New York, and she focuses on expanding Liftoff's network of partners, advocating for policy change, and facilitating meaningful learning experiences that increase awareness and understanding related to early childhood development in the region. She also leads Liftoff Western New York's volunteer advocate network, Onboard, which brings the voices of community partners together to promote better systems and policies that impact young children. So give a hand for Megan, and welcome.
Thank you. Wow, I really love this. Thank you, everyone who is taking time out, and particularly my friends with their cameras on, because it's so fun to have kind faces as I'm doing this, especially my mom, who is currently driving to Myrtle Beach and is joining us from the vehicle, which is a real indication of the support I've had along the way. I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides, and I'm hoping that we can have a conversation about my path to what it meant to become a social worker. I love being a social worker. I do not think that most people in my role think of me as a social worker until I start yelling about it at things like our Advocacy Day, which happens to align with the NASW Advocacy Day. And I walk by all the tables saying, I'm a social worker too. And it's very exciting. I love the idea that MSW stands for Masters of Social Work. I also am going to try and convince you today that it stands for Master of Systems Work, because I think that social workers are uniquely positioned to work in systems change and to make a difference on the policies and systems that support and serve vulnerable people, not only here in Western New York, but everywhere. Okay, Nope, not yet. So, what do you think of when you think of a social worker? I asked Google to tell me what they thought of when they thought of a social worker, and these are the images they came up with. I think it shows a lot of very happy people interacting with other happy people, coming to your door, connecting you with resources, potentially doing family therapy or group therapy in a school setting. There's obviously that very intense individual doing some kind of therapy, I assume, because they look very intense and upset. And obviously, because it is black and white, they are doing something serious. I don't think they look as happy, but they do look like they're doing important work. When most people think of social workers, they think of people who engage in direct service helping other people, whether that's in a supervisor role, or a direct service caseworker, support service person. And that is an admirable thing, and that work is really important, but it's not the only thing. So when you think of social worker, is what comes to mind the FBI field director. I use this example a lot because long before I ever thought about becoming a social worker, my Aunt Jeannie told me that the FBI field director held an MSW. And even though at the time I was a teacher, she was encouraging me to, instead of getting a master's in education, get a master's in social work, because she said you can do anything with a social work degree, which I fully agree with now. Do you think of a philanthropist or a senator or a lobbyist or an organizer or a grant writer or a policy researcher or a data analyst? You should, because there are MSWs in all of these fields, at every level of government and in every level of systems work. And so we can really do anything with an MSW. The first time I met then Senator, now Mayor Sean Ryan, he said, "My wife says that an MSW is a can-do degree." And I love that quote because I think it's true. I think with an MSW, you can do anything. And that certainly has already come true in my experience in these 2 years post-graduating. However, because my work doesn't necessarily look like what people think of when they think of a social worker, some people don't really understand it, including my 16-year-old who, this is a quote directly from her, which is, "I still don't know what you do." Every month since I started in my role, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I have recorded her telling me what she thinks my job is because I think it's funny, and she still has not quite gotten it right, even though I started in November 2024. So we are still working on it, and hopefully you understand it a little bit better before I'm done today. And also hopefully I can show her this recording later so she gets it too. Mike talked about this a little bit in my bio, and I won't give you deep dives into this, but my path to social work was not traditional. I went to school in my undergraduate degree for education. I became a teacher in a public school, and I loved that work. I loved connecting with students. I loved teaching. I loved being creative. And then I also loved leadership. So every time there was an opportunity for a leadership role, I put myself in it, which meant that eventually I got a promotion into an instructional coach role, which was helping teachers to use data and understand how to use it in their teaching. In that time, our path kind of train wrecked into the life of a 15-year-old girl who had been kicked out of her house, which was her adoptive parent asked her to leave. We at the time were in youth ministry at our church, and she came there and she didn't have a place to stay. And so we became, in a long story, eventually became her permanent guardians. And so we were not foster parents, but we were the non-traditional guardian of a teenage girl. And that helped us to really see the problems with the foster and adoptive system and see how many kids needed help. So at that time, we became foster parents through Gateway Longview. And we really loved that role. We loved helping and supporting families. We were a family that wasn't really in it to adopt kids, but we did adopt 3 daughters who are our daughters, Gianna, Janelle, and Mia, who we love very much. But working in that system as a foster parent, I remember sitting in a courtroom and the Judge Sezer, who later became the judge who finalized my adoption for my daughters, as a foster parent for one of the kids in our house, was like, Miss Battista is not talking, but she has a lot to say. And that was true. I recognized even then sitting in those courts that there were a lot of things that were happening that were just not fair. Parents of color were being treated very differently from the parents of my white foster children. We were seeing that even though caseworkers were working so hard, and we truly had great caseworkers all along the way in foster care, they had huge caseloads. There was high turnover, and the even just the process was really difficult to understand. There were month timelines that didn't seem to really mean anything until they really meant something. And so I had then been in two different and so I said, I'm going to go and work in foster care because I feel like I'm so passionate about it. And also, I think if I work inside of it, I can do something to change it. And so which strangely enough is also how I got into education. I would tell my parents' teacher friends, I hope to one day change education. So even if I was not going into social work, I think that I planned to be a social worker from the very beginning because I saw those systems as things that could be impacted. I Working in foster care was one of my favorite jobs. I was doing hero stuff. I was working with kids that had been in the system long term, and helping them to find adoptive placements. And when I could do that, it felt really good. But the end of the time that I spent in that role was during COVID. And that was a very, very tricky time for foster care and adoption and working in that world because everyone was either, if they were a residential or kid in a group home, they were stuck in that space and did not have anywhere to go because of the mandates related to COVID. I couldn't meet directly with my clients and work with them face to face, which was something I was passionate about. And I could see them deteriorating in those spaces. And also many of the adoptive placements that I had set up were deteriorating or disrupting because of such a high intensity time. And I thought, I need to make a difference in this. And because I don't have a degree in social work, I don't have the credentials to move anywhere from where I am. And so I need to go back to school to get my MSW, which I pursued. At the time, my best friend was pursuing a PhD, and I think it definitely trapped me into believing that higher education was the only pathway forward. And I'm so glad it did. I also think that I saw the value in research because of the work she was doing. And so I was like, I'm going to go get my MSW. I'm going to learn more about research. I'll hopefully do some research in foster care so I can impact it. And I'll get my certification as an adoption competent therapist because there's none of those in the area. And I think it's just a good business move. This was really how I approached. And if you know me, you know this is wild because I'm not anywhere there. So that is not where I ended, but that's where I began. What I learned through my placement work and through my classwork in the UB MSW program is that macro level work is deeply rooted in social work values. And so as I was learning about just the history of the field and the history of policy related to the systems that I loved, like foster care and education, that were so broken and I could see as so broken from inside working in it, I could see that that policy work was actually something that I could impact by being a social worker. And so if we look at the NASW social work values, things like service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationship, integrity and competence, the macro social workers that I was gifted to work with in my two placements showed up in those things every day. So at Say Yes, which had historically been a very micro placement, but it just so happened. And Mike Lynch, really, I'm so glad he asked me to do this, but also shout out to him for literally my entire life path because he saw my resume that said I was a teacher and was like, I know exactly where I'll put you. You can go to Say Yes, which made a lot of sense because it was the intersection of education and social work. But because it was also when they were launching their Say Yes Little Scholars program, I actually got to see program development. I got to write their handbook and see how creating policies for parents and professionals really made a difference in program creation. And I understood that policy really made a huge difference. I also took my Intro to Policy course with Dr. Critelli at 7:30 a.m. That was my very first class I ever attended. And she let us choose a policy to investigate, and I investigated the Adoption for Families Act, which I had never looked at. I had been working in foster care for 5 years and had never looked at the policy that most directly worked or most directly dictated the job I was doing. And so spending a semester looking at that and understanding that it was created during a time where the war on drugs informed a lot of what happened around adoption policy. And that in 1997, when Bill Clinton was president, almost 100% of senators and congressmen voted to pass this act that said kids can't spend this long in foster care. We have to move the system along quicker. Was truly created to oppress families, specifically single parent families of color, Black mothers. That policy was created so that those mothers wouldn't be able to get their kids back. Because as we all know, addiction is a problem that takes more than 12 or 16 months to overcome. And so creating timelines in that system were really a form of oppression. And during that class, I realized policy is everything. If we are not doing something in policy, me going back and working in adoption competent therapy or me going back to supervise a foster care program, for me, I understood that will not make the kind of difference I want to make in the lives of kids. Because if the system is flawed and there's no one working on the system, how will we move anything forward? So Say Yes was impactful for me. That first year was so impactful for me because of my policy courses. And then I had a year at Partnership for the Public Good. I reviewed these, I think there's like a Venn diagram of macro pathway speakers and Partnership for the Public Good placements. And I think there's a reason for that because it is such a place where it's like a training test kitchen for what you want to do when you grow up in macro social work, because you can do a little bit of everything. You can do research, you can do policy work, you can do advocacy. I was lucky enough when I interviewed at Partnership for the Public Good, they were doing a project they had on their agenda, getting money in the Erie County budget for kids that had aged out of foster care. And being that I had worked in my role trying to prevent kids from aging out of foster care, I had a lot of experience with what these kids' experience was like. And so it was just such a great timing thing for me. And all the way along, these things had happened where it just aligns perfectly with timing that I could work on that campaign. I learned in that time the value of storytelling and the value of collecting with integrity the stories of foster care alumni who are really a vulnerable population. When you are collecting the story of a young girl that says, at that time I started working in sex work to try and prevent harm for my family or for my siblings who were coming up in foster care because we needed more money. How do you tell that story while still maintaining the dignity of that person? And that work was work I really learned at Partnership for the Public Good. I learned how to carry with care the stories of people and really how deeply rooted in building relationship that was. I also was able to engage in research about foster care and foster care alumni and advocate directly with legislators for the first time. So I met with all parties of the Erie County Legislature, and we were able to get a $400,000 budget put into the Erie County budget for foster care alumni, which was an unprecedented kind of funding in New York State. It was so exciting. Once you feel the rush of a policy win, I think it's all you can do, truly. I can't go back. And honestly, I know this because now that I invite people from all different positions and fields into policy work, I can see the bug of policy work like spreading amongst my cohorts and peers in the work I do. I love this quote, which really informs what I do with macro work, which is, if we only intervene when harm occurs, we are always working upstream. Social workers have to belong in the places where the rules are written. So if we're only jumping in the stream to rescue people out of it and not instead working on building the dock to safely get them onto boats so they're not in the river to begin with, we're missing tons of opportunity. At the end of my placement at Partnership for the Public Good, I had a crisis because I was like, this is exactly the work I want to do and they're not hiring. This is exactly the work I want to do. And this work will bring me to places like DC or Baltimore, or there are other places in the country, but not here. I deeply love the I was going to say the Buffalo Bills. True. I do deeply love the Buffalo Bills, but I deeply love Buffalo. My kids that are adopted have biological family here. My family's here. And so I knew that I needed to stay in Buffalo, but I also wanted to do this work. And so, thankfully, I have family and support that allowed me to take time with my transition because I was able then to find what I call a unicorn. Liftoff Western New York. So I was out of the program for a few months. I actually took my grant writing class and turned it into a position doing prospecting for a grant writer. And I looked for grants for them I wanted to do something that would build my skills, even if it wasn't permanent. And then a job was posted for Liftoff's advocacy and learning coordinator. When I say that this job is a unicorn, it gives me a position where I can work deeply in policy from the beginning to the end. I can build strategic partnerships and build power around policy issues. I can bring together different coalitions to work together for one goal. I can do training and teaching. Let me tell you about Liftoff. Liftoff started in a bathroom, and this is my favorite story. It is the informal story, but we're all friends here, so I can tell you. A bunch of philanthropists came together, strong women in our community came together and said, what are funders doing to make sure that young children are ready for kindergarten? At this time in history, which was around 2017, kids were the first 1,000 years was really important, or the first 1,000 days, 1,000 years was really important. We were talking about how the first 5 years were really important and that kids were entering kindergarten not ready. And so these philanthropists, foundations like the Oshai Foundation, the Health Foundation of Western and Central New York, the Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo, the Cummins Foundation, Tower, many foundations from around Western New York came together and said, we're going to put together funds to do research on what will make sure that kids have everything they need in their first 5 years of life. They did a report called Looking to the Future, which was a review of Western New York's early childhood systems. And they came up with some priorities, which I'll talk about in a minute, that they said, here are the things that if we can impact these systems, we will impact all kids. They also set purpose for what Liftoff would one day become, which was an ability to convene leaders in support of early childhood, to lead advocacy in our region, both at the local and state level, and to educate and inform people about early childhood issues. My fearless leader, Rachel, who is in the glasses in this bottom picture right here, along with my partner in communications and marketing, Amy Moranti, did this work pretty much alone for 5 years and did a great job and spread the story of Liftoff. And then they were able to expand and create a position, which is now my position, to not only expand our capacity for advocacy in our learning network, but also to create a voluntary network of individuals to join us in our advocacy and to facilitate that network, which is called Onboard. And I'll get to that too. Here's something important to know. Systems work is essential for children. I don't know if you know this, but babies are not Republicans or Democrats. They do not know if they live in a blue state or a red state, but they will know if their families lose childcare, can't pay their utility bills, or are pushed to eviction. They also are unfortunately, unable to vote, which means that they are consistently devalued across budgets and policy priorities. Liftoff exists to make sure that those kids are seen and that they have a voice. In a few of our campaigns, like early intervention, which is the system that provides universal services and supports to kids with delays and disabilities. New York State is currently 48th out of 50 for timely provision of services for kids with delays and disabilities through early intervention, which think of the state you would least like to live in. New York is doing worse than them. I'm certain of it. And so it is important for you to understand that in New York State, we are wasting time and kids are on wait lists instead of getting services that they need. This is important because 90% of brain development happens before a kid turns 5. And so this is why we need to make the most of these early years. We also work in childcare and increasing access and affordability to childcare. universal developmental screening. So making sure that there is a system in place where kids can be screened for developmental strengths and developmental needs to make sure that they're getting exactly what they need. We also exist in the lead space. I'm the chair of the policy committee for the Lead Safe Task Force of Western New York. And so I'm doing that work because lead poisoning is all lead is poison. There's no safe or acceptable level of lead for kids. And right now, kids in Buffalo are being lead poisoned at a rate that is 4 to 8 times greater than those in Flint, Michigan. And so these are very deeply rooted Western New York issues. And really, and important for you to understand, all issues are kid issues. And so each year, Liftoff creates an advocacy agenda around these things. We bring these issues to Albany. We make sure that legislators know about them, and that they understand that while everyone loves a photo opportunity with a baby, not everyone wants to invest in what they need to make sure kids get what they need. And so Liftoff exists to make sure that we are amplifying volume around those issues. And that's truly my work. My work is to bring learning around these topics to partners and to advocate with policymakers to make a difference. The way that Liftoff is a little different than other organizations might be is that they have historically taken a grass tops approach to organizing. This is something I did not understand as a part of my MSW, so I put it in here and I'll only talk for a second about it. But the idea is that most organizing we know about is grassroots organizing. When you think of people petitioning or rallying or knocking on doors, broad collective action from everyday people. The goal of that is to bring people together so that they are too loud to ignore. Grass tops organizing is impacting influencers in the community to influence policymakers. And so because Liftoff's roots are in philanthropy, it's natural for us to take a grass tops approach. So we leverage relationship to influence policymakers. We use our credibility to engage policymakers directly through philanthropy, medical providers, higher education partners, and those with direct relationships. But what I have learned in my role is that effective campaigns really use both. And so my role has allowed Liftoff to move beyond just grass tops organizing and include grassroots organizing strategies into our campaign. Day to day, we're in the grass top space, but our campaigns combine these efforts to impact things for kids through our development of Onboard to expand to people from all walks of experience. So what does Liftoff do to move the needle for policy, and what role am I doing? It's a lot of things, and they're on this, but I'll just point out to a few. In the corner, it's my favorite picture from this year, which is me with Senator Baskin. We were supposed to meet with her legislative director, and then she walked in and was like, come in my office, let's do this. Senator Baskin has agreed to support all early intervention bills for kids in Western New York and is leading the charge on making sure that lead is a qualifier for early intervention for young children. We're really proud of her support. And she made us stand in the right place, so the lighting was great for our picture. So I'm really proud of that, and we're really proud of our work with policymakers. We were featured in the Buffalo News in a story about early intervention. We recently released a report about rural access to childcare because most of the childcare voices are coming from urban populations, and rural communities have their own unique challenges related to that. And we also are a partner with Live Well Erie and other coalitions, and we use social media to just expand education to the community. Truly everything that we do is to increase outcomes. And so the more inputs we have, the more outcomes we have. And as our numbers grow in volunteers and strategic relationships, our outcomes grow. For example, last year we had 2 legislators offer letters of support in the budget for one of our campaigns. And we had 11 meetings when we went to Albany with 22 advocates. This year, we were able to double that, and we brought 44 Western New Yorkers to Albany for Advocacy Day. And we had offers of support from 7 legislators, and they offered other forms of support that they hadn't previously, like attending a rally or doing a press conference with us. And that's just for one of our campaigns. And so as we bring people together, it is making a difference. Not only for the support we're getting, but also we're seeing our priorities show up in budgets, which will then show up in policy, which is ultimately the goal. I do want to just take a quick pause and say, you bring yourself to every role you're in. And I'm so lucky to have spent my last semester at UB doing a research project with Professor Sue Green about trauma-informed advocacy and activism, because there is the opportunity to do a macro project as part of that, of our work at UB. I was able to do deep research and create a framework for trauma-informed advocacy that I am constantly teaching on to try and lift all boats in advocacy in Western New York, not only the ones that Liftoff is part of. Many degrees can competently find people to share stories and engage or organize others in active advocacy or activism, but not every degree is prepared to take care of the people sharing those stories. And that is like such a beautiful marriage between macro, meso, and micro social work, when we can bring individuals into larger policy work and make sure that they are prepared, taken care of after, compensated fairly, and we lessen their harm and risk of re-traumatization. Being a trauma-informed and UB being a trauma-informed program isn't only about direct service work, but also how can we make policy, grant-making, research, advocacy, leadership, and other macro spaces be more trauma-informed? I'm going to take a few minutes because I know there are some students here, and this is one of the things that Mike talked about when he talked about this talk with me, is how can students prepare for macro roles? I was so grateful to bring Grace and Zach, UB social work students, with us to Advocacy Day this year, and to put them in my groups so that I could use that time to coach them on things I thought they should do as they were preparing to try and go into macro work or political spaces. Here are some things that worked for me. Sometimes I did these things accidentally, but I encourage you, if you're a student, to do them on purpose, which is placement is everything. Widen your view of macro and take leadership opportunities wherever you can. So not everyone can do a PPG placement. And I do think PPG is so valuable if you're macro-minded, but being in a political office, also very valuable. Being in a space where they are launching a new program and you can get on the side of how do we communicate to people, also a macro placement and an important option. And so I would say really be thoughtful about placement. I said meet with Michael Lynch, but he doesn't have time to meet with everyone. I'm sure that I'm just saying, for me, that was really helpful, because when I said I would like my role to be a job that is in the intersection of research and policy work, he said, I know exactly where you need to be. So knowing someone that knows the placement options and meeting with people ahead of that so you can talk about your career goals is really important. Make your coursework count. When possible, make your coursework macro. Research macro things. You are given lots of leverage and opportunity if you are talking about the impact. When I wrote a paper, for instance, for my trauma-informed advocacy class, or my trauma-informed class in my last semester, I had to choose a vulnerable population, or a population that trauma had impacted. So I chose foster care alumni, and I researched not only the impact and the research, but I also included the policy. And so making your coursework count and making it macro is really important. When possible, wait or be in the market. I think that one of the things that we can think in macro is there won't ever be a role that works for me or is what I want. And it sometimes just takes patience and regular job searching. And so there are job websites that, unlike Indeed, specifically focus on jobs in policy and advocacy, and you can set alerts for those so that you know what's coming. You can search for jobs on LinkedIn like that. And I will tell you that sometimes people post jobs on LinkedIn that they don't post other places. So following advocacy orgs on LinkedIn is really helpful to make sure that you're in the market and seeing the job postings that are coming out. And then engaging with people right now to test where you want to land. If you are in a more traditional placement and you think, I did want to do macro, but I didn't get an opportunity for a macro placement, ask where you can engage in macro or advocacy tasks. Many places have an advocacy person on staff, even if you're working in direct service work. So if you are working in a foster care agency, they probably have someone that's responsible for advocacy or speaking out on staff. So ask if you could be connected to that person. If you have Ask them how they decide what their policy engagement's going to be. What are their policies around budgets and making sure if they're getting a legislative grant, for instance, who's working on that, and ask to be engaged in that work if you can, or just interview that person to talk about what that's like. Uh, Connect with a mentor. I would love to connect with anyone who wants to work in macro. I'll tell you that. But there are people in our community that want to see more social workers come into this space, and so get connected with someone who's doing the work that you're doing. All that it will hurt to ask if you get told no is your time. So if you say, I'm really interested in going into policy, and you reach out to the person who's in charge of policy for Sean Ryan's office and say, will you talk to me and just tell me about your career path and how you got here? I'd love to just hear from you. The worst that they can do is not respond to you. So take risks and put yourself out there. And then volunteer. If you can get engaged in a coalition, or if you can get engaged in some kind of volunteer advocacy, you can put that on a resume, and it's really important. I will tell you that in my interview process, I'm so glad that I had the experience I had in coalition work through my placement. But if I hadn't had a placement where coalition work was a part of it, I would have made sure that I would spend time on a coalition, because anyone can join a coalition pretty much. And if you have that experience, then you have someone who could write you a letter of reference. You have something to put on your resume. So I'm going to tell you that because I want more social workers to become macro, I will tell you that if you don't know where to start, you can start with Onboard. And so I'm putting this in here. I'm happy to link in the YouTube description so people can click it if they're watching it later, so that if you want a place to land where you can build some advocacy skills or build some policy skills, Onboard's open to anyone. We have students in that space. I added some pictures here of these folks on the bus that are raising their hand. Those are all new people that came with us to Advocacy Day for the first time. So I'll take you on an Advocacy Day and show you what Albany is like. We also have networking and learning opportunities through Onboard. So especially if you care about young kids or want to be in a space that impacts children, you're welcome with us. And I think that's it. Oh no, one more. This is my favorite slide. Are you ready? Really shows who I am. So shout out to RBG. Social workers belong in spaces where decisions are made. I love that quote about women. Same is true about social workers, and there's a lot of intersection between women and social workers, so even more so. When people think of social workers, they might think of the roles they do in more traditional fields. They may think of the person that they interact with at the hospital if someone passes away, or they might think of a foster care person going to do home visits. But importantly, the perception of social workers are common descriptors like empathetic, compassionate, patient, dependable, culturally competent, organized, and resilient. They're seen as supportive, unusually competent, deeply understanding, and skilled in problem solving. These are the people we need doing things. Think about the people right now that are in positions of power and authority. Would it not be a more beautiful world if those people were more empathetic, more compassionate, more patient, dependable, culturally competent, and resilient? We need social workers to be making policy, voting on policy, advocating for change, running for office, and making sure that change is implemented. So I'm encouraging you to be the start of that. Thanks. That's it. That's what I have.
Round of applause for Megan. What a great talk, especially considering it's social work month too. So especially relevant. I have a bunch of comments and questions, but I am going to save that and give the floor to you all first. So I know we have several educators, community members, alums, faculty, staff, students. So any questions or comments for Megan?
This is so easy. Thanks, everyone.
I have a question.
Oh man. Okay, let's go, Mike. What do you got?
When are you going to run for office? Like, what's your timeline for that?
So everyone should have a timeline for when they want to run for office, I believe, truly. I'm working. There's a couple of things. I got to make sure my parent, well, never mind. I'm not going to say that. My mom would vote for me no matter what. I know it. I am waiting for my kids to graduate, but I will run for office. I don't want to share time in Albany while my kids are still in school. Also, I really love my job. They will have to pry it out of my hands. I hope that I stay at Liftoff for a really long time, but I won't think of running for office on the state level until after my kids graduate. I will, however, be running for school board before that. So don't worry. I will do it.
That's great. I was just thinking your sort of networking experience, systems, writing, storytelling, empathy, passion, story, like all of it just seems to really, really
Mm.
fit, and would make you a fantastic, candidate or public official, no matter where you decided to go.
Thanks. I will tell you that I am now at this point thinking that maybe uh, staffers or people who work in political offices that are not the ones that run for office, they are the people working till midnight on the night the budget is due. And so just as important as running for that office is engaging in political offices differently. And so if you are not a person who wants to run or give the speech, which obviously not me, I'm the weirdo who loves public speaking and icebreakers. But if you're the person that doesn't want to be that public facing, working on staff in a political office is a super high value career for people pursuing macro social work.
For sure, the ones turning ideas into reality.
Right.
Lots of times those are the people who are not in front of camera.
Yeah.
So what about some of our students? Any questions or comments? I know we have a bunch who are here right now, or our community members.
I see a question in the chat, Mike, so I'm going to answer it, which
Yeah.
is how do you see macro work intersecting with social work in non-traditional spaces like the corporate business world? I will tell you that so that's not the role I play, though I do see that as a valuable macro role. But I also, part of the work I do with Onboard is engaging the business community to be engaged in advocacy because people care about what people in positions of power think. And so engaging people in the medical field or business field or education field matters because there's name recognition there. And so I love there are several orgs right now that I know are engaging with social work in the corporate business world. That's not the work I do, but I do engage the business world in advocacy and policy work, and that's a really important space for them to fill in.
Great question and great answer.
Megan, I can't thank you enough for your outstanding presentation. We just need to see more of you, right? And it's so good to see other alums as well on this call. You, I thought, gave a wonderful definition just by way of your entire presentation of the micro and the macro and the macro and the micro. We talk about that a lot, but to fully understand that is another thing, right? And oftentimes when we're doing macro work, folks may not feel like I don't have time to reflect or to exude, this empathic response. When in fact that is the piece, as you've indicated, that makes the difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think um, when you think about even some of the models we learn in early policy courses or theory courses about think about the ecological model, right? Like everyone talks about that in papers during their social work program at some point. I feel like that's like one I wrote about a lot. Um, how do you make if you are a person who's not thinking that way, you might make a policy to fix a problem that creates a much bigger problem. If you're creating a policy that doesn't acknowledge, oh, there's actually been systems of oppression for long years, and so we have to acknowledge not only I think a good example of this is like when the sheriff's office wanted to put community workers in communities and put a lot of budget towards putting community workers. That's great, but how do you make sure that those communities that have been oppressed by police over time will engage with a community worker? And really, I think a social worker brain is the brain that fixes that. A social worker brain is the one that brings those things together. And so all places of leadership, all places of power. Social work month forever.
Oh, wow. I'm glad we're recording this. Thank you, Megan.
So I have a question that's more about like your career path and your
Mhm.
path in general. So when you look at like where you sort of your path, it seems like there's a lot of things like, wow, that worked out perfectly. Like Say Yes Buffalo like mixes what you're interested in with systems, but also your experience. But I also know that a lot of sort of your path working out the way that it did came down to, I think, your sort of intangible skills that you bring or reputation you built through sort of very intentional action. So I think there's certainly some, good fortune, but I also think you created a lot of that good fortune through your work and your charisma, intelligence, follow through, reliability. So I guess could you talk a bit about that? Like how you try to show up in spaces to build that reputation for yourself so that more of these opportunities do open up for you. Because I do think a lot of your path is a result of how you show up. And I think it's helpful for you to explain to people like what that looks like.
Yeah, I think one of the best compliments I ever got was from Deja James at PPG. We were driving in my car and she said, you are a person that even if you don't have the experience of the person you're talking to, you can connect with them. And I think really it's come down to that over time for me is just wanting so deeply to make sure that people feel seen. And so like charisma is important, but like there are a lot of people through history that are terrible that have charisma. And so for me, I want to make sure that I'm a person that like when someone leaves my circle of influence, that they remember that I like spent time caring about them and trying to like put them in a place where they are feeling dignity and worth and respect in a really intentional way. And that is everyone from, a senator to a mom that I might be talking to that's like, well, I just didn't apply for early intervention for 2 years because I didn't know it was weird that my kid wasn't speaking and making sure that she is not taking any shame or space from that, but she is empowered to speak out and know that her story is a story that matters. Um, I also think there have been a lot of like right time, right place. Everything has worked out great, but more than anything, I'm just like obnoxiously optimistic. And so if something does not go my way, I also lean into like the idea of I'm like grateful for that no, even if in the moment I'm not grateful for that no, I'm grateful because I know that like the right thing will come along. And so I actually applied for what I thought it was such a fancy job and I like talked about it really excitingly because I was like, this is a big deal. Like social work student is going to get this job, which was working um in a political office of a federal politician, but working locally. And the interview was honestly the only bad job interview I've ever had. Like nobody turned their camera on. I felt so anxious at the end of it. And I was just so disappointed. Like, people have invested so much into me and I'm not going to be able to do this. But like in 24 hours, I was able to say, but I'll be able to do something. If it wasn't this and that's fine, I'll move on to the next thing and it will be great. And so just that like aggressive optimism, like that regardless attitude has been really important.
That's great. I would also add, just from knowing you, is that you are just super dependable and you're always putting yourself out there. Like you're not afraid of trying something, taking a role, the leadership role. And I think that is admirable. And I think people see that. And I think that opens doors too. I love the aggressively optimistic term.
I did not know how many compliments I would get during this talk. I would have reached out to you and asked if I could do it earlier, honestly. So nice, Mike. Thank you. Um, Diana, I see your story about storytelling. How does someone get better at storytelling if their chosen practicum doesn't focus on that? I'd love to work with refugees, and that would be an important skill. Um, People are teaching about storytelling in spaces outside of your practicum. And so I would like look for, like, there are free webinars on storytelling all the time. And so I would start there, probably look for some training or professional development around storytelling, even if it doesn't come from your chosen practicum. Sometimes we're working on skills that we know we need that aren't necessarily directly applicable. Um, I also would say uh, there are great people doing work with refugees that are doing that. And so um, I encourage you to look into some local organizations like Built with Grace Karimbizi, who's amazing, or like look up Bijou Bahati, who's like doing that, and like follow them on LinkedIn and see what they're doing, because then you'll be able to like see what they're doing to be great in that space to develop some of those skills. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Any other questions or comments? Well, this has been fantastic. A secondary benefit of doing these talks is I always leave so pumped up and also aggressively optimistic. So I appreciate that. I appreciate everyone's time for being here today, and I'm super appreciative for Megan. And I think her mom Margaret Wilson.
Yeah, hi,
So,
Mom.
hi,
She's so
Megan's mom.
cute. She's
Yeah,
driving to Myrtle Beach. Be
nice,
safe.
jealous. Well, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your Thursday, everyone. And again, special thank you to Megan. Another round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.